Hello, my name is Michael Harrington, and I'm working with Kai Win and Pasha Sadegian. And our group developed a process and a model to test the quality of wine given a certain level of variable input. This is for the Big Data class, fall, spring 2017 semester at Georgetown University. So we all know from personal experience that there's often a mismatch between consumers' wine purchases and their taste preferences, generally because of their lack of knowledge of the various products. This knowledge gap is then furthered by the huge variability in the grape growing and production process that the vintners have at their hands. This creates a very inefficient market for wine production and consumption, as producers have a hard time targeting their customers with the right product, and consumers don't really know how to choose the right product. So what we decided to do was go use data sets for red and white wines with variables representing quality ratings as well as different chemical and physical properties. These data sets came from the UCI Big Data Repository and are for public use. So some of these physical and chemical properties are present in all wines, but in different and varying amounts. Our model attempted to quantify the combinations and the amounts of these properties that determine what a high quality wine would be. So we developed a model to predict which of these physical and chemical properties and in what quantity would yield the highest quality wines. Also, the ratios, depending on whether the wine is red or white, tend to matter. So what's kind of the purpose of this? Well, we believe that our model could make the wine market more efficient. Producers could use the data to improve the quality of their products. That is, they could test these physical and chemical constituents in their wines and determine whether it's going to be rated as a high quality or low quality wine. This, we feel, it would really help small producers with limited marketing budget and distributions reach a more micro customer segment and have those targeted spends directly at them. And also, we believe that it can help the wine consumers, given a certain level of inputs, they might be able to predict whether or not they would enjoy a particular wine. So again, we use two data sets, one with red wine qualities and white wine qualities, and there's 11 explanatory variables across the two data sets. They were fixed acidity and volatile acidity, citric acid, residual sugars, chlorides, free and total sulfur dioxides, density, pH, sulfates, and alcohol. Again, those are the independent variables. The dependent variable is an ordinal quality score. The score is between 3 and 8, with 3 being the lowest rated and 8 being the highest rated and the highest quality wine. Within this data set, there were no identifying variables such as grape types or brands, prices, or vineyards. And so the focus of this analysis was on these chemical and physical properties. So I'm going to turn it over to Pasha now, and he'll kind of walk through a little bit more in depth on the analysis that we did and the model that was created. Pasha?
Thank you. So let's walk through some of the quantitative observations and our results, our quantitative results. As Michael pointed out, I should share my screen. As Michael pointed out, the dependent variable in our case, quality, was an ordinal variable, modeling type, and the other variables were all continuous. So we looked at the correlation matrix for the 11 different explanatory variables that we had. So now we're looking at the correlation matrix for red wines, and we can observe a few things. We can see that fixed acidity has a very strong positive correlation with citric acid. The same variable, fixed acidity, also has a strong correlation with density and pH. We can also we can see that sulfur dioxide, the free sulfur dioxide, for example, has a strong positive correlation with total sulfur dioxide. So that's That's reasonable. We should expect that. We can also see that density has a positive correlation with fixed acidity, and we can see that citric acid has a strong correlation with fixed acidity and volatile acidity. So our decision here was to exclude these 4 variables because they had a strong correlation, very positive or very negative correlation with some of the other explanatory variables. And looking at the correlation matrix for white wines, we can see that fixed acidity has a strong negative correlation with the pH variable. And if we observe, we can see that free sulfur dioxide has a strong correlation with total sulfur dioxide, and it has a moderately strong correlation with residual sugar as well. So here we exclude fixed acidity and free sulfur dioxide because of the correlation that it has with the other explanatory variables. Here you can see a graphical representation of the different variables that we just went over in the correlation matrix. Now going to our actual regression, we use the ordinal logistic regression because our dependent variable is ordinal in this case, quality. And for the partitioning of the data, we partitioned our data into 3 segments. One was a training segment, which was 60% of the population, of the observations, and our validation data set consisted of 30% of our observations, and the testing data set was 10% of the observations. So first looking at so this right here is for the to your left, you see the regression results for white wines, and to your right, you see the regression results for the red wines. So for white wines, we can see that the model itself was statistically significant. We can also see that the model was able to explain 31% of the variation in the data. And we can see that the parameters noted in red or orange I should say, they were significant. Our intercepts were all significant, and the explanatory variables were significant, excluding chlorides and citric acid. And looking at the regression results for the red wines on your right, we can see that the model itself was statistically significant right here. And we can see that all the explanatory variables were statistically significant. And this model was able to explain about 41% of the variation in the data. I should note this is for our training results. We did note the validation and testing results in our report. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening. Michael, do you have any closing statements?
The last thing I just would add is that we felt really good about the results of this model, and given that they explain 30 to 40% of the total variability in the quality ratings, given that the quality rating is a qualitative test that are being done by human people, a lot of variability within that process. And so to explain 30 to 40% with physical and chemical properties, we felt that was fairly significant in predicting whether a wine would be rated as low, medium, or high.
Following Michael's remarks, going over our conclusion, for the red wines, we observed that the model was able to explain about 41% of the variation in the data, as I pointed out earlier in this presentation. However, for the validation portion of the data set for red wine, the model was able to explain 37% of the variation in the data. And for the testing portion of our data, the model was able to explain about 30% of the variation in the data. Looking at white wine, as pointed out earlier, the model was able to explain 31% of the variation in the data. However, and that's for the training set. For the validation set, for the validation portion of the data, the model was able to explain 32% of the variation in the data. And for the testing portion, and this is for white wine again, the model was able to explain about 28% of the variation in the data. In other words, around 70% of the variation in the data was unexplained by our model. Now, looking at the p-values of the model and the individual variables that we had, both for the white wine and red wine, we conclude that, as Michael pointed out, we feel strongly about the model itself. We observe that the model is statistically significant. However, we believe the model is weak in terms of its explanatory and, more importantly, its predictive power, because around 70% of the variation in the data is unexplained by the model that we present in our report. And this is intuitive. This is not counterintuitive. If we look at quality, we know that quality is a subjective measure. People have different tastes and preferences. Some people like sour, some people like sweet, etc., etc. So being able to explain the quality of the wine just by looking at some chemical or physical measures of a wine is a bit short-sighted. And on that note, we do not believe this model is able to capture most of the variation in the data. Finally, to wrap things up, we found the model to be statistically significant, both for white wine and red wine. And based on the results of our analysis and the intuition behind the variable quality, our dependent variable, while we did not find the model to be reliable by itself as a tool for helping wine producers increase the quality of their products, we did, however, find the model to be a helpful complementary tool in helping wine producers increase the quality of their products. This concludes this presentation. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your attention.